Suddenly, he hears a faint voice nearby. Helen is talking in her sleep, whispering again and again that they are trapped on a deserted island and begging someone to help them. Tears slowly roll down her cheeks as she sleeps. Even in her dreams, she seems to be praying that rescuers will not abandon them and will eventually come to save them. Chin had always believed that Helen was naturally optimistic and cheerful, but now he begins to realize that he may have misunderstood her. Her positive attitude might actually be a mask hiding deep fear and vulnerability. He suspects that, deep down, Helen is holding on to the hope that rescuers will appear within a week. That belief is probably the only thing helping her stay strong. But if 7 days pass with no rescue, her hope might shatter completely. Chin quickly pushes these troubling thoughts aside. There is no time to worry about the future right now. Instead, he focuses on the present and opens the menu of the system's virtual store to see what his points can buy. With 2,000 points available, he can exchange them for several knowledge packages, including things like a wilderness first aid encyclopedia or a wildlife identification guide. Chin studies the options carefully, feeling torn. Ideally, he would like to obtain every knowledge pack available, but the system allows him to choose only one. On a deserted island where tools are scarce and crafting materials are limited, he decides that practical skills will be the most valuable. In the end, he selects a knowledge package called the Encyclopedia of Fieldcraft. The moment he confirms his choice, bright waves of energy suddenly surge around his body. The virtual system announces that the knowledge package is now downloading directly into his mind. True to its name, the encyclopedia contains a wide range of survival skills. It includes knowledge about crafting bows, building useful tools, and even learning techniques such as pottery that could help them survive much longer on the island. Among the many things included in the knowledge pack, he even gains instructions on how to make paper from natural materials. As the information settles into his mind, the boy realizes that with skills like these, he could realistically survive on this deserted island not just for days or weeks, but for many years if necessary. Just as he is processing this realization, the system notifies him of another feature. A special service called the Wheel of Fortune has been activated. It allows users to spin a wheel and randomly obtain valuable items or abilities, with each spin costing 1,000 points. However, because this is Chin's first purchase in the system store, he receives one free spin. Chin studies the glowing wheel carefully and quickly notices something that makes him grin. There are no empty sections anywhere on it, meaning that no matter where the wheel stops, he is guaranteed to receive some kind of reward. Taking a breath, Chin spins the wheel and watches as it rotates rapidly before slowly coming to a stop. It lands on a skill called Cheetah Speed. He remembers seeing this ability in the store earlier, where it was priced at a staggering 10,000 points. Realizing what he just obtained, Chin feels like he has hit the jackpot. A calm voice from the virtual system asks him whether he would like to activate the new skill immediately or store it for later use. After thinking for a moment, Chin decides there is no urgent need to activate the ability right now. Instead, he chooses to save the Cheetah Speed skill for a moment when it might truly be necessary. Soon the night passes, and the soft light of morning begins to filter through the trees. Helen slowly wakes up, stretching slightly as she lazily rubs her eyes and prepares to face another day on the island. As her senses fully return, she suddenly realizes something strange. The camp is quiet, and Chin is nowhere to be seen. Slightly uneasy, Helen begins looking around in different directions, hoping to spot him nearby. A moment later, Chin finally appears walking back into the camp. With a relaxed smile, he greets her with a cheerful good morning and proudly announces that he has brought fresh fish for breakfast. Helen calls out to him with a bit of frustration in her voice, asking him to warn her next time before leaving the camp. She explains that waking up alone made her worry. Chin calmly replies that she had been sleeping so peacefully that he didn't want to wake her unnecessarily. After a short pause, Helen tells him that she needs to step away for a while. She asks him to stay in the camp and specifically warns him not to approach the area further down the river. Chin immediately reminds her to bury anything she leaves behind so that the smell does not attract wild animals or contaminate the water source. Helen reacts quickly and somewhat emotionally, explaining that she simply wanted to wash herself. Left alone at the campfire, Chin quietly eats the fried fish while thinking about why Helen reacted so strongly. Then it slowly dawns on him. For days now, she has not had a proper chance to clean herself, and for someone like her, that must be incredibly uncomfortable. Being shy, she probably hesitated to mention it until now. Thinking about it further, Chin realizes that he himself hasn't washed properly in a long time either. In fact, he begins to notice that his own body now carries a rather unpleasant smell. Before Helen leaves, Chin tells her that he plans to explore the nearby forest to see if he can find anything useful. He asks her to call out when she returns so he knows she is back safely. As he walks through the forest, something soon catches his attention. On the trunk of a tree, he notices several large tinder fungi growing in clusters, which immediately sparks his curiosity. The system quickly provides him with information. These fungi can grow on tree trunks for many years. While they are not edible and even have blood-thinning properties, they are extremely useful as natural tinder for starting fires. Chin feels genuinely excited by this discovery. The system's knowledge helps him understand which mushrooms are safe and which are not. Encouraged by this, he begins thinking about searching for edible mushrooms in the area as well. During his exploration, Chin finds several bushes covered with berries. Unfortunately, most of them are not included in the information provided by the system, leaving him uncertain whether they are safe to eat or potentially dangerous. Just as he continues searching the area, a strange rustling sound suddenly comes from the bushes nearby. The unexpected noise immediately makes him cautious. Chin quietly hides behind a tree and waits. Moments later, a large and surprisingly plump hare suddenly leaps out into the clearing. The system informs him that hares in the jungle can reach speeds of nearly 70 kilometers per hour, making them extremely difficult to chase. Chin quickly forms a plan. If he throws his axe accurately, he might be able to stun the animal. Without wasting time, he hurls the axe toward the fleeing hare. Unfortunately, his throw misses the target. Refusing to give up immediately, he rushes forward, hoping the hare might still be momentarily confused and slow enough for him to catch it. But the hare reacts instantly, darting through the forest with incredible agility and speed. Within seconds, it disappears completely into the thick undergrowth. Breathing heavily, Chin drops to the ground in frustration. He always knew that catching a wild hare was difficult, but he never imagined it would be quite this challenging in reality. Deciding that he has spent enough time wandering around, Chin chooses to head back to camp. By now, he assumes Helen has likely finished washing at the river. However, after walking for some time through the forest, Chin suddenly stops. A troubling realization hits him. He no longer remembers which direction the camp is in. Fortunately, the morning dew has dampened the ground, leaving his footprints clearly visible in the soft soil. Following the trail of his own footprints, Chin finally manages to find his way back. But when he arrives at the camp, Helen is still not there. Slightly irritated that her bathing is taking so long, he suddenly hears a loud scream coming from the river and immediately rushes toward the sound. Without hesitation, the young man sprints to the riverbank and quickly spots Helen. Concerned, he immediately asks if she is all right and what exactly happened. Helen looks completely terrified. Her entire body seems frozen with fear, and she struggles to even form words. Finally, she begs him for help and points toward the water, claiming that there is a snake nearby. Chin instantly jumps into the river, splashing water everywhere as he moves quickly. A moment later, Chin lifts something from the water and shows it to her. It is not a snake at all, but an eel. Smiling reassuringly, he explains that it is simply a rice eel, a harmless creature that poses no danger to her. Leaving Helen safely on the riverbank, Chin heads back toward the camp. Meanwhile, the system provides additional information about rice eels, explaining that they have a fleshy body without bones and are considered quite tasty. They typically live in shallow rivers and flooded fields. Chin feels satisfied with the morning's events. With the eel and the fish they already have, they now have enough food to last through the day, which boosts his confidence. Meanwhile, Helen slowly dresses again, her face still flushed with embarrassment. She secretly hopes that Chin didn't accidentally see anything inappropriate during the chaos by the river. After a while, the girl returns to the camp where Chin is waiting. The moment he sees her, he immediately asks if she is feeling better. Helen reassures him that she has calmed down and is feeling much better now. She also realizes that Chin stayed nearby the entire time, ready to protect her if something truly dangerous appeared. Suddenly, however, her mood shifts. Feeling oddly embarrassed and irritated, she asks Chin why he keeps looking at her that way. Chin answers honestly without thinking too much. He simply says that she looks beautiful and quite attractive. Helen's face instantly turns bright red after hearing his words. She stares at him in stunned silence, completely unsure how to respond to such an unexpected compliment. Unable to handle the awkward moment, Helen quickly turns around and walks away from the clearing, saying that she is going back to the camp. She clearly doesn't want him to see how flustered she feels. As she walks, Helen feels confused by her own reaction. She has received compliments from men many times before, yet none of them ever made her heart race like this. Back in the clearing, Chin smiles slightly after she leaves. Even he hadn't expected those words to come out of his mouth. They simply slipped out naturally without any planning. Thinking again about the rice eel he caught earlier, Chin realizes something important. Although rice eels usually live alone, it is unlikely that the one he found was the only one in the area. With that thought in mind, he decides to return to the river once more and try his luck at catching another eel. Near the riverbank, the boy notices patches of damp soil. He remembers that eels often dig burrows in such places to create small hidden nests for themselves. After searching carefully for a while, Chin finally spots a small and almost invisible hole close to the water. It looks like the perfect hiding place for an eel. Knowing that these burrows usually have two exits, one opening above the ground and the other connecting directly to the river, Chin decides to block the water exit first so the eel cannot escape. Using sticky clay and damp soil, he carefully seals the lower opening that leads toward the river. This way, when he begins fishing inside the burrow, the eel will have no chance to slip away into the water. Chin pauses for a moment and thinks carefully before acting. He knows that blindly sticking his hand into an eel burrow could be dangerous. Other creatures might also be hiding in there, and some of them could be far more dangerous than a simple eel. Instead of risking his hand, he gathers several long, sturdy stalks of grass and begins weaving them together into a simple cord. He plans to lower this improvised tool into the hole first. After all, snakes often occupy burrows dug by eels since they cannot dig their own, and that could easily turn into a risky situation. Chin remembers a childhood incident that taught him this lesson the hard way. When he was in elementary school, he once reached into a burrow hoping to grab an eel and accidentally pulled out a water snake instead. He was lucky that the snake wasn't venomous, but the memory stayed with him for years. At that moment, the system quietly provides additional information. It explains that the best time to catch eels is during the summer mating season, when they frequently leave their burrows and release streams of bubbles in the water, making their locations easier to identify. Taking a slow breath, Chin carefully lowers the bundle of grass into the burrow. He moves patiently, trying to feel what kind of creature might actually be living inside, whether it is truly an eel or something more dangerous like a snake. Suddenly, something inside grabs the grass bundle and begins pulling on it forcefully. The unexpected tug sends a rush of adrenaline through Chin's body. Reacting instantly, Chin yanks the grass rope upward with a sharp motion. To his relief and excitement, an eel comes sliding out of the hole along with it. He can't help smiling, another successful catch. Helen quickly walks over and inspects the catch with clear excitement. She looks genuinely impressed that Chin managed to capture several more rice eels on his own. Chin laughs softly and tells her it wasn't as easy as it looked. He had to search carefully and work hard to locate the burrows. Still, he feels satisfied because their efforts mean they now have more food to rely on. Helen tilts her head thoughtfully and wonders what they should do with all the eels. If they cook them all right away, they probably won't be able to eat everything before the meat spoils. Chin calmly explains that they can smoke the eels instead. By drying the meat over smoke, they can preserve it for several days and eat it gradually without worrying about it going bad. He quickly gathers wood and starts a small fire, then builds a simple rack above it. As he works, he explains that smoking the eel meat will only take 3 to 4 hours since they are not planning to store it for a very long time. Watching him work, Helen suddenly asks if there is anything she can help with. She admits that she sometimes feels awkward standing around while he does most of the survival work. She explains that Chin is always busy building or hunting, and she really wants to contribute more to their shared effort to survive on the island. Chin smiles kindly and tells her that he will teach her how to weave ropes from strips of tree bark. Once she learns the process properly, she can take responsibility for making ropes for their camp. After explaining that, Chin mentions that he plans to visit the river again. Before leaving, he asks Helen to heat the large stone slab they use for cooking so that dinner preparation will go faster later. At the river, Chin checks his bottle trap again. Unfortunately, it only catches 2 or 3 small fish at a time, rarely more than 5 or 6 a day. In his opinion, that amount is far from enough to support both of them consistently. Thinking about the problem, he decides the best long-term solution might be to construct a small dam in the river to create a natural holding pool for fish. With that idea in mind, they can rely on the smoked eel meat for the next few days while gradually collecting fish in the man-made pool, ensuring they always have food available. For now, Chin feels reassured. With the eel meat they prepared, they already have enough food to last about 3 days. This allows him to start thinking about improving their shelter in case heavy rains arrive. Before leaving the riverbank, he flips the trap open and releases the fish he caught into a small artificial pool nearby, so they can remain alive until needed. Back at camp, Helen's stomach is growling loudly with hunger after the long day. She eagerly watches Chin turning pieces of eel on the heated stone slab, while he tells her dinner will be ready in just a few minutes. For a finishing touch, Chin decides to add a handful of wild berries to the dish, hoping their flavor will give the eel meat something special. The berries land on the hot stone with a soft, sizzling sound. Their juices mix with the eel, releasing a rich forest aroma that immediately makes the food smell even more tempting. Helen eagerly picks up a hot piece of eel from the slab. She carefully blows on it and slowly tastes it, savoring every bite. The smoky flavor of the grilled eel blends perfectly with the slight tartness of the berries. Each bite feels tender and juicy, melting in her mouth and filling her with genuine delight. Kin watches her reaction with quiet satisfaction. Seeing Helen enjoy the meal he prepared makes all the effort feel worthwhile. Later, holding a piece of smoldering tinder fungus in his hand, the boy prepares to return to the clearing where he previously spotted the hare. He hopes this time his hunt will finally succeed. Although the morning dew has erased most footprints on the ground, Chin had wisely carved small marks into nearby tree trunks earlier, making it easy for him to navigate back to the clearing. Chin feels determined. Since they finished building their shelter, he hasn't gone on a serious hunt. Now their fish and eel supplies are running low again, and he knows it's time to secure fresh meat for the camp. 2 days earlier, Helen had asked him curiously why he suddenly dismantled their original shelter. Chin explained that the old shelter was small and not very reliable. He wanted to build a stronger and more spacious structure that would protect them better from wind and rain. Throughout that day, they worked hard together adjusting the design. By evening, the new shelter looked far better than the old one, larger, sturdier, and much more capable of shielding them from harsh weather. Now Kin carefully follows the path where the hare had run earlier. He knows he only has a few hours before the tinder fungus stops smoldering and the fire he carried dies out. He reasons that hares usually don't travel very far from their territory. In a jungle full of vegetation, they rarely need to wander long distances in search of food. However, reality proves more difficult than he expected. Tracking down the hare's burrow turns out to be far harder than he imagined. After searching for quite some time, the young man finally notices a hole near the roots of an old tree. The discovery instantly excites him. The virtual system informs Chin that hares usually build burrows with several exits, often 3 or more, so the hole he found is likely just one entrance among several. Before trying to smoke the hare out, Chin carefully seals the other possible escape routes around the burrow to prevent the animal from slipping away. After searching thoroughly, he discovers 5 different openings connected to the same burrow. He blocks 3 of them, leaving only 2, one for the smoke and the other where he plans to wait for the animal to emerge. Using the glowing tinder fungus, Chin creates thick smoke and directs it into one of the burrow entrances so the fumes will force the hare to flee. He positions himself quietly near the second exit, crouching low and watching carefully. Now all he can do is wait patiently for the hare to burst out in panic. After a short while, a large hare suddenly shoots out of the hole at incredible speed, forcing Chin to react instantly. Without hesitation, The young man lunges forward and manages to grab the animal in a swift motion. In the next moment, he realizes that what he caught is actually a small young hare struggling wildly in his hands. A few seconds later, several more tiny rabbits suddenly dart out of another nearby hole, and Chin realizes he has accidentally discovered an entire family of hares. Although wild hares usually do not live in large colonies, this burrow clearly housed quite a sizable family. Chin quickly extinguishes the smoke and cautiously kneels down to look deeper into the burrow. Inside, he finds 3 more baby rabbits huddled together in a corner. They tremble nervously, clearly frightened by everything that just happened. Even though the larger adult hares managed to escape during the chaos, Chin still considers the day a success. Catching several young rabbits is already a decent result, and he feels satisfied with his hunt. When Chin returns to the camp, he can hardly hide his excitement. With clear pride in his voice, he shows Helen the rabbits he managed to catch. Helen immediately picks up one of the tiny bunnies, holding it gently in her arms while smiling and softly playing with it, as if it were a small pet. Chin watches the scene with an amused grin, but soon reminds her that these hares are not toys. With a calm but practical tone, he explains that they are meant to be food for survival. He then mentions that he plans to go down to the river to prepare the animals for cooking. Helen looks down at the fragile little creatures in her hands and suddenly feels conflicted. She says softly that they are far too cute to eat and asks Chin if he could please spare them. Trying to find a compromise, she suggests that they shouldn't rush such a decision. The rabbits are still small and thin, she argues, and there isn't much meat on them anyway. Maybe they could keep them alive for now, feed them, and wait until they grow bigger before deciding what to do. Chin listens carefully and eventually nods in agreement. He admits that Helen is right. There wouldn't be much meat from such tiny animals at the moment. So they decide to cook the single larger hare he caught and raise the smaller ones instead. Helen hugs the bunny in her arms a little tighter and whispers quietly to it, almost apologetically. She murmurs that she tried her best to delay their fate and hopes the little creature will forgive them. Meanwhile, Chin begins carefully preparing the larger hare for cooking. He knows that wild game often has a strong odor, so he makes sure to drain the blood thoroughly and remove the skin properly to improve the meat. As he works, he notices that the fur of wild hares is much rougher and thicker than that of domesticated rabbits. Instead of discarding it, he decides to keep the skin, thinking it could be useful later for clothing or insulation. Helen wrinkles her nose slightly and admits that she has never liked rabbit meat. To her, the smell is too strong and unpleasant. Chin simply shrugs and jokingly suggests that she can stick to eating fried fish while he finishes the hare meat himself. Truthfully, Chin understands her reaction. Even after cleaning the meat carefully, he can still smell the strong scent of the wild hare. Despite his efforts, the odor never completely disappears. While eating, Chin notices Helen smiling to herself for some reason. Curious, he looks at her and asks why she seems so cheerful all of a sudden. Helen brightens and announces with excitement that tomorrow will mark the 7th and final day of their stay on the island. She explains happily that this means they will probably be rescued very soon, and the thought alone fills her with hope and excitement. Chin watches her glowing smile and feels a little uneasy. Her optimism surprises him because, in reality, their situation is still uncertain and far from guaranteed. Later, Helen notices Chin holding some strange wooden tools in his hands. Curious, she walks closer and asks him what exactly he is trying to do. Chin calmly replies that he is practicing how to start a fire. Helen looks confused and points at the burning campfire nearby, saying that they already have a perfectly good fire and she doesn't understand why he needs another one. Chin patiently explains that he wants to learn new survival skills. The more techniques he masters, the better prepared they will be, especially if difficult days come in the future. Thanks to the knowledge pack he received earlier, Chin now knows 5 different methods for creating fire. Although the flywheel technique is the most efficient, today he decides to practice using a wooden bow drill instead. He begins working carefully with the bow drill, moving the wooden tool back and forth while focusing on keeping a steady rhythm. After a short time of intense friction, a thin stream of smoke begins rising from the small wooden board beneath the drill. Chin gently picks up the smoldering bundle of moss and blows on it slowly, feeding the tiny ember with careful breaths. Within a minute, A small flame bursts to life at his feet. Helen watches the whole process with wide eyes, clapping happily and praising him with genuine excitement like an impressed child. The next morning, the two prepare to leave their camp and head toward the shore. Before going, Helen gently says goodbye to the baby rabbits and asks them to behave while they are gone. Chin watches her quietly, thinking about how strongly she believes that rescue will arrive exactly on the 7th day. Deep down, he worries about how she will react if reality turns out differently. Her belief is strong, but it may shatter if their expectations fail. Helen sits down on the sandy beach and stares toward the horizon with eager anticipation. As time passes and no ships appear, she assumes they simply need to wait a little longer. Kin quietly prepares for the possibility that they might have to spend the night here. He gathers firewood and a few coconuts so they can at least stay warm and comfortable. Since he learned a new fire-starting method yesterday, Chin decides that this is a good opportunity to test it again under real conditions. As the sky begins growing darker, Helen starts shivering slightly. With worry in her voice, she asks why the rescuers are taking so long when the sun is already close to setting. Her thoughts begin racing. Maybe she miscounted the days, and it's only the 6th day instead. But then an even worse idea crosses her mind, that maybe no one is coming at all. Chin senses the fear growing inside her. He struggles to find the right words, unsure how to explain the harsh truth without completely destroying her hope. Before he can say anything, Helen suddenly grabs his hand tightly. Her eyes are filled with panic and despair. She breaks down into hysterical sobs. Tears stream down her face as she cries that she doesn't want to die on this lonely, forgotten island. Overwhelmed with emotion, she desperately demands that Chin promise everything will be all right and that they will definitely be rescued. Her panic grows stronger with every passing moment. Realizing he must stop her spiraling panic, Chin makes a sudden decision. He lightly slaps her cheek. The shock immediately snaps her out of her hysteria, and she stares at him in stunned silence, asking why he did that. Chin gently explains that they must face reality, even if the truth hurts. Accepting the situation is the first step toward surviving it. Unable to hold back her emotions, Helen suddenly throws her arms around him and cries loudly. Through trembling words, she admits that maybe no rescuers are coming after all. Khan quietly reassures her, saying that even if rescue never comes, she is not alone. As long as they have each other, they will keep fighting to survive. Night slowly covers the island. The two sit silently beside their fire, staring at the endless ocean while the quiet darkness surrounds them. Early the next morning, Chin suddenly wakes up after receiving a sharp slap across the face. Confused, he asks Helen what just happened. Helen crosses her arms and declares that yesterday he slapped her first, so she simply returned the favor. According to her, they are now even. However, her tone soon softens. She quietly thanks him for helping her calm down the previous night, admitting that his actions helped her get through a difficult moment. Her words sound sincere, but Chin still finds her sudden shift in mood a little strange. He studies her expression carefully, unsure what she is really thinking. Helen suddenly points toward the ocean and notices something unusual. According to the tides, the water should be lower right now, yet the sea level hasn't changed much. Chin calmly explains that tides don't always occur at exactly the same time each day. Sometimes the difference can be several hours compared to the previous day. He reminds her that a full week has already passed since they arrived on the island. Now they will probably have to wait another 3 hours before the next low tide begins. Opening a coconut with his knife, Chin suggests they relax for a while and enjoy the sweet coconut milk while waiting. Helen looks out at the sea thoughtfully and comments on how quickly the entire week has passed. Then she quietly asks whether rescuers might still come for them. Kaya notices that Helen seems calmer today. After yesterday's emotional breakdown, she is finally able to talk about rescue without collapsing into despair. Helen then quietly explains that she once heard something troubling. If someone is missing for 2 weeks and no one finds them, they are officially declared dead. Sheen quietly admits that their situation is far from hopeful. If no rescue team manages to locate them within the next month, the search will almost certainly lose momentum. In the worst scenario, the operation might even be called off entirely, leaving them alone on this island with no one still looking for them. Helen listens to his words in silence, letting them sink in slowly. Deep down she feels that, in a moment like this, Chin could have said something a little more encouraging. Right now, even a few hopeful words would mean a lot, because emotional support is one of the few things keeping their spirits from collapsing. After thinking it over, Helen admits that she has almost accepted the frightening possibility that rescuers might never find them at all. If that truly happens, she suggests they should consider building a boat with their own hands and trying to sail away from the island on their own. Just then, Chin suddenly turns around with a sharp, focused expression. His attention shifts toward the ocean, and he begins studying the water carefully, scanning the surface as if he has noticed something unusual in the distance. Noticing Helen staring at him curiously, the young man asks why she is looking at him so seriously. Then he casually mentions that the water has already begun to recede and suggests that this might be a good time to head out and search for more food along the exposed shore. After spending some time gathering supplies, they finally return to their small camp. Chin immediately notices something strange. The young hares have clearly tried to escape. The animals have partially gnawed through the cage, leaving visible bite marks where they desperately tried to break free. Seeing the damaged cage, Chin realizes they came back just in time. If they had been delayed even a couple more hours, the little hares would probably have managed to finish chewing through the bars and escape into the wild. Chin asks Helen to keep a close watch on the hares so they do not attempt another escape. Meanwhile, he begins preparing a fire nearby so they can cook the food they collected earlier. While Chin works nearby, Helen finishes preparing their simple dinner. After everything is ready, she calls out to him and lets him know that the meal is prepared and they can finally sit down and eat. However, Chin is still busy reinforcing the enclosure and building a stronger cage for the rabbits. Without looking up, he tells her to start eating first. He explains that he wants to finish the cage properly so the rabbits will never be able to escape again. Before she throws anything away, Chin also asks Helen to keep the clamshells they collected earlier. He mentions that the shells might be useful later. Hearing this, the girl looks puzzled and asks how something like empty shells could possibly help them. Chin explains that the seafood they gathered today should last them about 2 days if they manage it carefully. Over the next few days, the low tide will mostly occur around midday, which means they will still have opportunities to collect more shellfish when the ocean retreats again. He reflects for a moment and says that they are actually quite fortunate that neither of them is allergic to seafood. Right now it has become their main source of food. Still, he knows this cannot be a long-term solution, and eventually they will have to find more reliable and sustainable sources of nourishment. Feeling exhausted from the long day, Chin admits that he desperately needs a proper night's rest. He asks Helen to wake him at midnight so he can take his turn keeping watch during the night. Helen suddenly realizes that Chin barely slept the previous night because he had been helping her and staying alert for danger. Thinking about it now, she feels deeply grateful for how much effort he has been putting in to protect both of them. Sometime later, Chin suddenly opens his eyes and blinks in confusion. To his surprise, the sky is already bright with morning light, even though he expected to be woken up around midnight. Still half asleep and rubbing his eyes, he asks Helen why she never woke him up like he had asked her to do the night before. Helen gently explains that he had been sleeping so deeply and peacefully that she simply did not have the heart to wake him. She decided it would be better to let him sleep through the night so he could properly recover his strength. Looking at her more closely, Chin notices that Helen herself looks very tired. It becomes obvious that she also needs rest. He tells her that today she should remain in the camp and relax, making it clear that she does not need to do any work at all. With that decided, Chin leaves the camp, remembering that low tide will arrive around 1 in the afternoon. Before that happens, however, he wants to explore the island and try to find other kinds of food that could expand their limited diet. Unfortunately, searching for edible plants turns out to be much harder than he expected. After wandering through the forest for more than 2 hours, the only things he finds are strange, unfamiliar berries that might be poisonous. Glancing up at the sun and judging its position in the sky, Chin estimates that it must be around 9 in the morning. He begins wondering how far he has wandered from the beach and whether he should head back soon so he does not miss the next low tide. Suddenly, Chin freezes in place. A faint but very familiar sound reaches his ears, causing him to stop and listen carefully. As he focuses on the noise, The young man slowly begins to recognize what it might be and roughly figures out where the sound is coming from. Without wasting another second, he rushes toward the direction of the sound. Soon he discovers something incredible, a large grove of towering bamboo growing thickly on the island. For him, this discovery feels like striking gold. Taking out his stone axe, Chin immediately begins cutting down several young bamboo stalks. He plans to use them for a wide variety of practical purposes around their camp. Bamboo is known as one of nature's most versatile materials. Chin understands that with enough bamboo, many tools that once seemed impossible to craft, almost like parts of a survival kit, can now become achievable. However, cutting bamboo proves to be far more difficult than he originally imagined. Every time his axe strikes the stalk, the entire plant bends and shakes violently. The movement weakens the impact of each blow and even causes a strong rebound, making the work exhausting. After several long hours of effort, Chin finally decides to stop and rest. His hands are numb from the constant swinging, and he can barely feel his fingers anymore. He gathers several straight young bamboo stalks and mentally calculates how much time he has already spent working in the forest. Although he successfully collected a good amount of bamboo, Chin realizes that he has probably spent too much time here. Now he needs to hurry back to the camp as quickly as possible. When he finally returns, Helen is waiting for him at the camp. Her face instantly brightens with relief and happiness the moment she sees him safe. She tells him she has been waiting and even prepared fish for him so he can regain his energy after such a long day. Helen eagerly suggests that they start eating right away because the fish has already been sitting for a while and is beginning to cool down. Chin takes his portion of fish and examines it carefully. To his surprise, some parts of the fish have turned almost completely black, clearly burned from being cooked too long. Seeing the puzzled look on his face, Helen quickly asks what is wrong and why he is not eating yet. Chin calmly replies that the fish is still too hot and that he should wait a moment for it to cool down. Helen watches him closely, secretly hoping that he will enjoy the fried fish she made. She is clearly nervous and curious about what he will think of her cooking. Chin carefully chews a small piece and swallows it with visible effort. Trying to keep a straight face, he says that the fish tastes very good, doing his best to sound sincere so he will not hurt her feelings. Hearing his compliment makes Helen smile proudly. Feeling encouraged, she decides to taste the fish herself, confident that if he liked it, she will probably enjoy it too. However, the moment she takes a bite, her expression changes instantly. She spits the fish out in disgust. Watching her reaction, Chin cannot help but smile faintly, realizing she has just discovered the same terrible taste he endured. Embarrassed, Helen admits that the fish is completely burnt and bitter and practically impossible to eat. She apologizes sincerely, feeling guilty for wasting the food they worked so hard to catch. Chin quickly reassures her, telling her that everything is fine and she should not blame herself. He explains that only a small portion was burned and that next time it will turn out better if she cooks it a little more carefully. He gently asks Helen to stop forcing herself to eat the burnt fish and suggests that she try the oysters they collected instead. But Helen stubbornly insists she likes the fish, even though it is obvious she is only pretending so she will not disappoint him. Chin smiles again and softly tells her to relax and not push herself. Food should bring comfort and happiness, he says, not feel like punishment. After that, the boy begins crafting a new fish trap using one of the bamboo stalks and his stone axe. He hopes that this improved trap will help them catch more fish in the coming days. Chin then tells Helen that she also has an important task. Pointing at the remaining bamboo, he asks her to cut a section, hollow it out, make a few holes, and attach a string so it can be used as a simple bamboo water bottle. Helen looks at him seriously and tells him he should never hesitate to ask her for help. If they truly want to survive on this island, she says, they must support each other and share responsibilities equally. Chin nods and thanks her for the encouragement. However, he also reminds her not to rush and to be careful while working so she does not accidentally cut herself. Creating the new fishing trap requires patience and attention to detail. First, Chin splits one bamboo stalk lengthwise, shaping it so that the ends spread outward like the petals of an opening flower. This structure forms the base of the trap. Then he cuts another stalk into thin strips and begins weaving them around the frame, forming a sturdy basket-like structure. Next, He uses several of the remaining bamboo strips to build a narrow funnel at the entrance of the trap. This clever design allows fish to swim inside easily, but makes it extremely difficult for them to escape. After finishing his work, a notification suddenly appears in his virtual account. The system informs him that he has been awarded 500 points for successfully crafting a new fish trap. Seeing this message gives him a quiet sense of satisfaction and pride in the work he accomplished. Helen and Chin sit quietly beside the crackling fire, neither of them speaking for a while. They simply watch the flames dance and sway in the night air, the warm light flickering across the clearing and casting long shadows across the ground. The calm glow of the fire creates a rare moment of peace after the long and exhausting day. After a moment, Helen proudly holds up the water bottle she made earlier from a hollow bamboo stalk. She shows it to Chin with a small smile, clearly pleased with how her handmade container turned out. Chin examines the bottle carefully and sincerely praises her work. He notes that she did an excellent job and especially admires the clever little loops she added for the rope. According to him, that small idea makes the bottle much easier and more practical to carry around. As they talk, both of them begin appreciating just how useful bamboo really is. They agree that it is an amazing natural building material, and by the end of the conversation they decide that tomorrow they should return to the bamboo grove and cut several more sturdy stalks. Helen quickly adds that she does not want to feel like a burden while they are stranded here. She insists that she can help with the work and believes that her assistance in gathering bamboo will be genuinely useful. Chin then admits there is something he has been meaning to talk to her about for a while. At first, he tried not to give her too many responsibilities because he was worried about her emotional state after everything that happened. But now that she seems stronger and more stable again, he confesses that having her help would truly make things easier for him. Looking out over the surrounding forest, Helen comments that the bamboo grove they discovered earlier seems enormous. The thick clusters of tall green stalks stretch endlessly in every direction, almost as if there is no visible end to them. After traveling along the forest path for more than 2 hours, both of them start feeling the fatigue in their legs. Eventually, they decide to stop for a short break, sitting down to catch their breath and recover a bit of energy. As she looks around the quiet grove, Helen admits that she actually likes this place a lot. The tall bamboo creates a peaceful atmosphere, and she suggests that they might consider moving their camp here. In her opinion, the area feels cozy and safe, and it clearly offers plenty of useful materials. However, Chin quickly disagrees with the idea. He calmly explains that food remains their highest priority right now. Relocating their camp without carefully considering every detail could create unnecessary risks. Instead, he hands Helen his camp knife and asks her to begin searching for bamboo shoots, just like they had planned the previous night. Chin reminds her that the trip back to their camp will take quite a long time. Because of that, he tells her that whether she manages to find many shoots or not, she should return to this meeting spot by noon. Even though the bamboo grove is massive, locating the young edible shoots proves to be more difficult than Helen expected. Still, she refuses to give up. After carefully searching for quite some time, she eventually manages to find a few small shoots hidden among the roots. She decides to collect the smaller ones since the larger ones would be too heavy to carry all the way back to camp. When she finally looks at the small pile she gathered, Helen feels a sense of quiet satisfaction. In her mind, these shoots should provide them with food for quite a while. Suddenly, her body stiffens when she hears strange noises echoing through the bamboo grove. The sounds are unfamiliar and seem to be getting closer with every passing second. A moment later, her eyes widen in shock when she spots a wild boar stepping into a nearby clearing just a few dozen meters away. The sight makes her heart begin pounding rapidly in her chest. Helen tries desperately to stay calm and control her breathing. She bites her lip and struggles not to scream, knowing that even the slightest noise might draw the dangerous animal's attention. Quickly thinking through her options, she decides that the safest choice is to quietly leave the clearing and immediately go warn Chin. Wild animals like this could pose a serious threat to both of them. Helen soon runs back toward Chin, her eyes wide with fear and her breath uneven. She begins talking quickly, nervously explaining that she just saw a group of wild boars nearby. Chin frowns slightly and asks her if she is absolutely certain about what she saw. He wonders if she might have mistaken the animals for something else. Helen shakes her head firmly and insists she is completely sure. She says there were at least 7 or 8 wild boars, and they seemed to be moving straight in their direction. Realizing how dangerous this situation could become, Chin immediately grabs her hand and tells her they must leave the area right away before the animals get any closer. He explains that wild boars may not be predators, but they are still extremely dangerous animals capable of causing serious injuries. For that reason, they need to leave the bamboo grove as quickly and quietly as possible. However, their escape plan suddenly falls apart. When they reach the edge of the grove, they see that their path is blocked. Standing directly in front of them is the massive leader of the boar herd. Chin studies the animal carefully and wonders where the herd came from. Just moments ago, there was nothing there. The sudden appearance feels strange, and he guesses that the animals may have wandered down from the nearby mountains. A system notification appears, explaining that wild boars are notorious for their aggressive and fearless nature. Because they have very few natural enemies in the wild, they tend to behave with bold confidence and unpredictable hostility. Chin quietly tells Helen to remain calm and silent. Since the boars have not shown direct aggression yet, he suggests they try to slowly move away without attracting attention. But suddenly the massive leader lifts its head, clearly catching the scent of humans in the air. It snorts loudly, its nostrils flaring as its eyes become sharp and suspicious. Without warning, the boar lets out a harsh roar and charges straight toward them, forcing the 2 young survivors to turn and run for their lives. Immediately, the entire herd follows their leader. The thunder of hooves slams against the ground as the animals race after them. Chin quickly realizes how serious the situation is. These creatures are incredibly fast, and within minutes they will catch up. Helen struggles to breathe as she runs, her legs growing weaker with every step. She gasps that she cannot keep going much longer. Panic begins to overwhelm her, and terrifying thoughts fill her mind. Looking at Chin, she suddenly believes she might only slow him down. With trembling hands, she pulls away from his grip and shouts for him to leave her behind and save himself. She insists she has no strength left to continue running. Chin stops and turns around sharply. The look in his eyes is filled with anger and determination. It is clear that he has no intention of abandoning her. Behind them, the wild boars continue their relentless pursuit. The distance between them grows smaller as the heavy pounding of hooves echoes through the forest, heightening the sense of danger. Realizing they cannot outrun the herd forever, Chin understands that fighting might be their only chance to survive. Gripping his stone axe tightly, he gathers his courage and suddenly begins shouting loudly at the approaching animals, hoping that the sudden noise might scare them away. Surprisingly, the tactic works. The massive leader of the herd abruptly stops and freezes, clearly confused by the sudden display of aggression. Chin suddenly remembers advice he once heard from a hunter during a television talk show. The hunter explained that in wild boar herds, none of the animals are willing to sacrifice themselves for the group. If they feel threatened enough, they often retreat. Using that knowledge, Chin continues shouting even louder while boldly stepping toward the animals. Every movement he makes is filled with fierce determination. He swings his axe through the air, acting as if he is already victorious. The confidence in his stance gives him the courage to keep advancing. Finally, Chin decides to throw the stone axe directly toward the herd. His goal is not necessarily to hit them, but to frighten them enough to force a retreat. The plan works perfectly. The huge animals suddenly turn away in panic and disappear into the nearby forest, unwilling to risk confronting him any longer. Helen slowly approaches Chin, her face still filled with worry. She asks anxiously if he was injured during the encounter, but Chin calmly assures her that he is completely fine. Even so, Chin quickly warns her that the herd might return at any moment. This is no time to relax, and they must head back to their camp immediately. As Chin bends down to retrieve his axe, relieved that it has not broken, he suddenly freezes. Standing directly in front of him is the enormous leader of the herd. The massive boar stands motionless only a short distance away, breathing heavily as it stares straight at him. Chin soon notices something alarming. One of the animal's legs has a deep wound that is bleeding heavily. It becomes clear that the injury prevented the boar from escaping with the rest of the herd. Chin knows that wounded animals are often the most dangerous of all. Pain and fear can drive them into a desperate frenzy. If the boar feels cornered, it might launch a final reckless attack. Raising his voice, Chin shouts at the animal to leave. Then, without hesitation, he throws his stone axe toward the boar's head, hoping to drive the wounded beast away before it charges. The thrown axe strikes the boar, but lacks the force needed to seriously injure such a massive animal. Instead of retreating, the wounded beast lets out a furious roar. Its eyes burn with rage as it lowers its head and charges directly toward Chin with terrifying determination. Realizing the situation has become even more dangerous, Chin quickly understands what he must do. To protect Helen, he decides to draw the boar's full attention to himself. Without hesitation, he shouts for her to run back to camp immediately. He begins moving deeper into the forest, deliberately leading the enraged animal farther away. Step by step, Chin keeps the boar focused on him, making sure the distance between the creature and the place where Helen remained grows wider. Fully aware that he is risking his own life, Chin continues running. Over his shoulder, he yells again for Helen to return to camp without delay. His voice is firm and urgent. Every second could decide whether they live or die. As he hears the boar crashing through the undergrowth behind him, Chin realizes he cannot outrun the animal forever. At that moment, he remembers one of the rare skills stored in his system that might give him a chance to survive. Quickly summoning the virtual interface before his eyes, Chin scans through the available options and selects the ability called Cheetah Run, a reward he had once obtained from the mysterious Wheel of Fortune. In an instant, the system activates the skill. A notification appears stating that the ability will remain active for 1 day. Suddenly, Chin's body surges with explosive speed. The boar continues chasing with full force, but the gap between them rapidly widens until Chin finally manages to break free from the pursuit. At first, Chin is amazed by how powerful the ability feels. However, he quickly notices a serious drawback. The skill drains his energy at an alarming rate, exhausting his body far faster than he expected. After only a few minutes of sprinting, his legs begin to tremble. His lungs burn as his breathing grows uneven and shallow. A crushing wave of fatigue spreads through his muscles. Although the Cheetah Run ability is designed to last for an entire day, Chin's human body simply cannot handle such extreme strain for that long. In reality, he only manages to maintain the incredible speed for about 3 minutes. Still, that short burst allowed him to put several kilometers between himself and the raging boar. But the wounded beast refuses to give up. Driven by pain and fury, the giant boar continues the chase, its injured leg somehow only fueling its relentless aggression. Soon, Chin glances back and sees the animal emerging from the forest edge again. The boar notices him immediately and begins charging forward once more, picking up speed. With no time to waste, Chin rushes toward the nearest large tree and starts climbing as quickly as he can. His only hope now is to put himself somewhere the boar cannot reach. He silently hopes the animal will not spot him. Wild boars are known to have relatively poor eyesight, and the thick leaves and branches of the tree might help hide him from view. Moments later, the massive boar enters the clearing beneath the tree. It begins slowly circling the area, clearly searching for the human it believes is still nearby. Even though its vision is limited, the animal compensates with an incredibly sharp sense of smell. Before long, it detects the unmistakable scent of a human lingering in the air. Watching from above, Chin cannot help but feel a strange respect for the creature. Despite its injury, the boar chased him for kilometers without giving up. Its stubborn determination proves just how formidable wild animals can be. For a moment, Chin believes he is finally safe since boars cannot climb trees. But the very next second, the entire trunk beneath him shakes violently from a powerful impact. His heart nearly stops. Consumed by rage, the boar begins attacking the tree itself. It slams its skull against the trunk and digs at the roots, clearly trying to topple the tree and bring its target down. The tree sways dangerously with every strike. Chin suddenly remembers an old village story claiming that wild boars can knock down trees with repeated blows. He once thought it was just exaggerated folklore, but now he realizes it might be frighteningly true. If the attacks continue like this, unexpectedly, the boar suddenly stops its assault. It turns slowly and begins limping away from the tree. The heavy bleeding from its wounded leg and the exhaustion of the chase seem to have finally caught up with it. Carefully observing the animal, Chin estimates that the boar weighs around 200 kilograms. If he manages to kill it, the meat could be preserved and provide food for several months. Noticing how weakly the animal now moves, Chin realizes it may have reached its limit. Taking advantage of the moment, he carefully climbs down from the tree. Even though the creature is badly injured, Chin remains cautious. Animals on the verge of death often become even more dangerous. The moment he lands on the ground, the boar notices him. With a furious snort, the boar turns and begins rushing toward him again, clearly preparing for another attack. Chin waits calmly for the perfect moment. As the boar charges close enough, he suddenly sidesteps and slashes with his knife in a swift motion. Unable to stop its momentum, the huge animal crashes violently into a nearby tree. The impact knocks it unconscious, and the beast collapses heavily onto the ground. Breathing heavily, Chin stares at the enormous body lying before him. He knows the fight is not completely over yet. He must gather his strength to finish it. Moments later, the boar begins to stir and struggle back to its feet. Seeing this, Chin realizes he has only seconds to act. Understanding this may be his last chance, Chin leaps forward and drives the knife deep into the boar's skull. The creature releases a horrifying roar and suddenly rises, throwing him aside with tremendous force. Only then does Chin fully realize how thick the boar's hide and skull truly are. Even with all his strength, the knife strike was not enough to end the beast instantly. After a brutal struggle that feels endless, Chin finally manages to defeat the animal. Completely exhausted, he collapses beside the boar's lifeless body. A notification appears, informing him that he has earned 2,000 system points. As he lies there catching his breath, Chin suddenly thinks of Helen and hopes she safely made it back to their camp. The boar is far too heavy to carry whole. Realizing this, Chin decides he will have to butcher the animal and transport the meat back in smaller portions. The sun is already sinking toward the horizon. For now, he hides the carcass carefully so that other predators will not find it and plans to return tomorrow to retrieve the meat. Even so, Chin knows wild animals possess an incredible sense of smell. Despite his efforts, there is still a strong chance that other predators could discover the hidden carcass. Meanwhile, Helen believes she cannot simply wait. Determined to be prepared, she breaks off a sharp piece of stone to craft a weapon that might help her defend herself. She ties the stone firmly to a sturdy stick using rope, creating a crude but surprisingly reliable stone axe for protection. Next, Helen tears a strip of fabric from the hem of her dress, preparing it for use in whatever situation might come next. She carefully collects some of the ashes left from their campfire and places them onto the cloth. Her plan is simple. If wild boars appear again, she will throw the ashes into their eyes to blind them temporarily and escape. Just then, she suddenly hears Chin's voice nearby. He apologizes jokingly for not giving her the chance to fight the boars herself. Helen looks up in shock and sees Chin standing there, smiling quietly while watching her. Without hesitation, she runs toward him and anxiously asks if he is okay and whether he was injured during the dangerous encounter. Helen throws her arms around him as tears stream down her face. She cannot hold back her emotions and confesses how relieved she is that he returned safely. Through her tears, she admits she was terrified he might be killed by the wild boars and that she would never see him again. After calming down a little, Helen suddenly notices that Chin's clothes are soaked. She asks if he perhaps fell into water somewhere along the way. Chin simply removes the wet clothes and shrugs, saying that the explanation is a long story he will tell later. Feeling extremely embarrassed as he changes right in front of her, Helen quickly turns her head away, trying not to look at him. Helen gently suggests that Chin place his wet clothes closer to the fire so the warmth can dry them before night fully arrives. The evening air is already turning cold, and she worries that if the clothes stay damp, the chill could easily make him sick. Otherwise, she explains, he might catch a cold from the cold night air. Chin gives a small, tired smile and says he actually has quite a few interesting things to tell her. However, he adds that the story will have to wait, because right now he truly needs to sit down and rest. After a short pause, Helen gathers her courage and turns back toward him again. She softly offers to cook something warm for him, thinking that after everything he has been through, a proper meal might help him recover his strength. But the moment she turns around, she suddenly freezes. Chin's pants slip down unexpectedly as he changes his clothes near the fire, leaving her completely stunned for a second. Despite the awkward moment, their situation has clearly improved a little. Thanks to the bamboo fish trap Chin built earlier, they now have a steady supply of fish and no longer have to worry about going hungry every day. Chin also tells her that he managed to kill the wild boar that chased him and hid the carcass in the bamboo grove. Tomorrow, he plans to return there and bring back the meat. Helen is genuinely shocked when she hears this. She can hardly imagine how Chin managed to defeat such a huge and aggressive animal. Her admiration for him grows instantly, though it is mixed with a deep sense of worry. As she thinks about it more carefully, Helen realizes that Chin will have to go back into that dangerous bamboo grove again. The thought alone makes her visibly uneasy, and concern for his safety begins to show on her face. Seeing how anxious she looks, Chin calmly explains that defeating the boar was probably just a matter of luck rather than skill. In dangerous situations like that, he says, taking unnecessary risks is never wise. To explain his thinking, he decides to tell her an old parable that helped shape his outlook on life. Long ago, he begins, there was a small family living by the sea. The father worked as a fisherman, spending his days out on the water. But one day, the unforgiving sea claimed his life, and he never returned home. After losing her husband, the mother became terrified of the ocean. She forbade her young son from going anywhere near it, hoping that by keeping him away she could protect him. But the boy often ignored her warnings and secretly went out to sea with other fishermen from the village. Many years later, a massive tidal wave suddenly struck the village. The water flooded everything, and both the mother and son nearly drowned. When the exhausted mother could no longer stay afloat, it was the son, who had secretly learned to swim, who reached her and saved her life. After hearing the story, Helen nods thoughtfully and says she actually knows this parable. She understands the message Chin is trying to convey. Avoiding danger completely does not always guarantee survival. She realizes that Chin wants to be like the boy in the story, someone who does not run away from challenges but learns to face them. Chin agrees and adds that if they truly want to survive on this island, they must learn to deal with whatever problems appear instead of hiding from them. Chin also mentions another plan he has been considering. He wants to craft a bow from bamboo, so he can defend them against wild boars. In his opinion, those animals are the biggest threat on the island, and having a proper weapon would help keep their camp safe. The next morning arrives quietly. Chin prepares to head back toward the bamboo grove. Before leaving, he reminds Helen to check the fish trap and jokingly warns her not to burn the fish again like last time. While walking, Chin suddenly remembers that the cheetah run ability he used yesterday is still active until noon. Deciding not to waste the opportunity, he activates it again so he can reach the bamboo grove much faster. When he arrives at the grove, he quickly finds the place where he hid the boar's body. Unfortunately, it is clear that predators discovered it during the night and have already eaten part of the carcass. Still, Chin does not consider the situation too bad. Luckily, the animals did not consume everything. The most valuable parts, the large fillets, remain untouched. Chin decides that the boar's thick hide could also be extremely useful. If he removes it carefully, they might be able to turn it into something like a rug or a rough blanket for warmth during cold nights. While examining the carcass, he notices deep claw marks left by whatever predators fed on it. The wounds are nearly 3 centimeters deep, which makes him wonder what kind of powerful animals could have done that.